not clicking the table too much with your...
Like that? Like don't do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, welcome to Weddings by Cled. Here we are back in my kitchen to talk about one of my favorite subjects, food. When I book a bride and groom to start planning their wedding, one of the first questions I ask them is, how would you like the food service? And the answer is always, we don't know. So my job is to educate them on the different types of food services that are available at weddings. And there are 4 kinds. There are served dinners, there are family style dinners, which are gaining popularity. There are heavy hors d'oeuvre receptions, also called stations, and there are buffets. So today I'm gonna break them down for you, and I'm gonna give you the pros and cons of each kind of food service option that there is for wedding receptions. So, starting with the sit-down served dinner. This is probably the most traditional one. It's the one I've experienced the most. It was a little bit, back in the day, it was more popular up north, but now it's kind of gotten popular across the entire nation where people are doing more sit-down dinners. But here's some things you wanna think about when you do a sit-down served dinner. Number 1, you wanna make sure you have enough staffing. So something to talk about your caterer with is to ask how many servers per table. So it might be, 1 server per table, which I think is ideal. 1 server per 2 tables is okay if they know what they're doing, but anything less than that is no bueno. You wanna make sure you have enough servers, and of course that's gonna increase your budget a little bit, but don't scrimp on that, because you don't want people waiting around to get their food. The other thing you wanna think about with sit-down served dinners is that you typically have to have a place setting for each. Well, you have to have a place setting, a whole place setting for each person. Everybody's gotta have a fork and a knife and a spoon and everything needed to eat the dinner. So that's a rental item that you need to think about, which may or may not be included with your catering. So that's a question to ask them. So you have to have all of that china and flatware and glassware on the table, in addition to all of the glassware that's at your bar, that's at your hors d'oeuvre station before the sit-down dinner. So, and you also want to think about the timing of it. If you have a sit-down dinner, you have to have a cocktail hour. It doesn't have to be alcoholic, but you need to have some type of time before actually walking into the room and sitting down and finding your seats, which leads me to one last thing about sit-down dinners, and this also goes for buffets, is you have to have reserved seating. And a lot of people prefer not to have reserved seating, but I think it's a cluster if you don't, because everyone walks into the room and gets a seat immediately because they want to make sure they have a seat. And then, as I always say, the family of 3 or the group of 4 walks in and they can't sit together because all the seats are already taken. So you want to make sure you have the reserved seating and the servers and the budget, and think about the rentals and the timing for a sit-down served dinner. If it's done right, it can be absolutely beautiful. So the second type of reception is family style, and this kind of piggybacks onto a sit-down dinner because everyone is seated, everyone has a place setting, everyone has a specific seat, but the food is placed in the middle of the table where guests can partake of their own. They can pass the plates around, and it's a lot of fun if it's done right. And what it takes to make sure that a family style dinner is done right is good communication with your caterer. Make sure that your caterer has all of the serving equipment available for this type of a dinner. And if not, if they're renting it, do you have to pay for those rentals, or are they going to cover it, inclusive of the cost of everything else that they're doing? So that's another thing to think about with family style dinners. Another thing you might want to think about is maybe having the room temperature items set out on the table, and then having the caterers come around and serve the things that have to stay hot. So they're not just sitting on the table getting that like food coating that you see sometimes. That's not good. But when family dinners are done right, they can be so much fun and engaging and just really cool way to do a wedding dinner. So the 2 last styles include guests getting up and moving around more. It's a little bit more interactive, and you can be creative with both kinds, but I would say We have the buffet style dinner and we have the stations, or sometimes called heavy hors d'oeuvres. Now, either of these, if they're served at a mealtime, you're going to have to provide enough food to fill your guest up. So first we'll talk about stations, because a lot of people might think, well, if I have stations, it's gonna be cheaper, or I don't have to have as much food. That is absolutely not true. You're gonna have to have your proteins, you're gonna have to have starches and all the types of food to fill your guests up, because don't forget, they're coming to your wedding, they're bringing you a gift, they're buying a new outfit, you wanna make sure you serve them something to eat. So it's just a matter of how it's served. And the stations, I have to say, are one of my favorite ways to do a wedding, because I think it's fun, it's creative, it's interesting. So in one part of the venue, you may have a performance station with gourmet pizzas, or bacon bars are really popular right now, where you have all different kinds of bacon with different seasonings and different coatings on them. So they can be performance stations where you have a chef working at them. Bananas Foster is one of my favorite stations, where they're actually making the Bananas Foster with the flambe, and the aroma of that is ridiculous. It's so good. So you have stations strategically placed throughout the venue. You do not have to have 100% seating. However, I believe that there should be a place for guests to be able to sit when they want to sit down and eat their food. So the seating can be done creatively. It doesn't have to be the ballroom with all of the round tables in it. You don't have to have place cards, but you have to make sure that your guests are comfortable and that they have a place where they can either, you don't want to be negotiating a plate and a glass and then someone comes along and you got to shake their hand. It's next to impossible. So you want to make sure you think about ways that your guests can be engaged with other guests. Yeah, so those are my dog's footsteps, just so you know. That's when you're filming in your kitchen, that's what you get. That's your extra little bonus today. And he's waiting for his food. But back to your food. So speaking of station style receptions, heavy hors d'oeuvre receptions, you wanna make sure that guests have a comfortable place to eat their food once they get it. So we don't have the ballroom with all the guest tables and the place cards, but we want to make sure we have enough cocktail tables and enough bistro tables and enough places, and maybe a few reserved tables sprinkled in there to make sure that some of the older guests are guaranteed a place to sit so that they're comfortable. But it can be one of the most creative forms of meals at a wedding. And another thing on heavy hors d'oeuvres or station type receptions is you don't need a formal cocktail hour, because the way that I see a cocktail hour is something that you do before going into a sit-down meal. It's a sort of entryway into the next big thing. But when you have a heavy hors d'oeuvre reception, you really don't need that, because everyone's in the space already. The food is typically all out already, and it's kind of like anticlimactic to have a cocktail hour and then just, keep standing around the space. So I only think cocktail hours work with sit-down dinners and buffets. So on to the buffet. Now the buffet is, it's kind of the intermediary between a sit-down dinner and a heavy hors d'oeuvre reception. And it allows your guests to get up and get their own food, but it needs to be done right. Here again, you don't want to have table 1 finished and table 13 still waiting to go to the buffet. So you want to make sure that you have either your caterer or your planner or someone you really, really trust calling tables, watching as they go through the buffet line before calling the next couple of tables. And another thing I highly recommend is to have multiple buffet stations mirrored with the same items on each one throughout the room. And this depends on the number of guests you have. And I think if you have over 50 guests, you need to have this. And that way we can call literally like hemispheres. We can break the room into hemispheres, and we can call 2 tables on this side and 2 tables on that side, and everybody's eating at the same time. That's really important to think about with buffet dinners. So here are some things that you want to think about with any kind of dinner you're doing when it comes to feeding your guests, okay? One of the things you want to think about is timing. This all goes back to communication with your photographer. If you're planning on doing post-ceremony photos with your photographer, make sure you're done in time, because after your guests are done with that cocktail hour or waiting for introductions, they don't want to be standing around waiting for you to arrive, okay? Because it's just not polite to go on to the bigger meal until the bride and groom and the bridal party arrive. So you want to make sure that that's done in a timely fashion. The other thing to think about, guys, is your vendors. I've been to weddings where no one thought to feed the vendors. These people have been there, a lot of them 8 to 10 hours. Your planner, your photographer, your videographer, your DJ needs to eat, your band needs to eat. So these are things to think about ahead of time, and make sure you work out the timing of all of that with your planner, with your caterer. They need to be eating when you guys are eating. They can't be eating when important things need to be going on, because they need to be capturing those items like the toast or the cake cutting. And typically you want to have your vendors eat while guests sit down to eat, so that they can be energized and ready to move on to the next segment of your wedding day. So I hope those tips gave you a little bit of insight and knowledge on the different types of food offerings that are available at wedding receptions. I would love to hear your comments below. And here again, please subscribe to Weddings by Cled. Thank you so much for watching from my kitchen on food.